Hello everyone and welcome to this chapter in which we will be covering the lines after e4, e6, d4, d5, bishop d3, and now we will be focusing on what to do when black goes for the third move, d takes on e4. And this is one of the most common ways for black to reply to our bishop to d3 French, and here there's not really much else we can do than taking, and black just goes knight f6 in this position. I mean, there's not really any other sensible move. So black develops the knight, hitting our bishop, and here the key idea is that we will be keeping this bishop on the h1, a8 diagonal, and this is a really annoying line for the black players because we're constantly going to keeping an eye on this pawn, and then this bishop will have a much trickier time getting into the game. And in this position, there are a lot of moves that black can go for. c5 is really the main one and what I expect you to face the most. But of course, I've covered pretty much everything that is playable. And yeah, there will be simply a lot of moves that we will go through. But as I said, c5 is really the main one. But just in case, we need to have everything prepared. So whenever it gets played against you, you can just have a quick look on it and fix the line. So we will be starting with the move knight b to d7 actually, which is connected with the idea to push e5. And what you want to avoid against this is to not go knight e2, because if black gets in e5, he already equalized, as if we just take and go for the endgame. This is not enough because black on the next move will be ready to eliminate our precious bishop with a very fine position. I would even take black here. So yeah, we just want to avoid this at all costs, and therefore the clever way to start this is by playing knight to c3. And now, if black goes for the same little e5 idea, then it's a completely different story, as the knight has not yet committed to e2, and we can take on e5, and black can also throw in queen e7. If queen e7, we will be playing bishop to e3, and if knight takes on e5, point is to go queen d4, preparing long castle, and if black takes on f3, we can just take, continue with castle long, bring the h rook to e1, which is a very nice advantage for white. And if black goes for the sort of trickier knight e to g4, putting pressure on the e3 bishop, we can just eliminate it with bishop takes, and after bishop takes we can just throw in h3. Black usually goes bishop e6, but we can just continue with the same idea of castling long, followed by knight f3 and rook h to e1, with a very nice position for white, because black has a hard time finishing development. So instead of queen e7, knight takes on e5 is the other move, but now white is getting a much better version of the Zen game, as we can just trade and play the very strong bishop to f4. And now if black goes for this knight f3 move, we can just take with a knight, and we are ready to castle long on the next move. And really the problem for black in this endgames is that he's unable to reach the c7 square for his king, with his king. So yeah, generally in this type of positions, whenever black is losing the right to castle, if he can get the king to c7, he's generally okay as a rule of thumb, but that is not really the case, and this is one of the key ideas for white to play for an advantage in this scenario, is just to get this bishop to f4, and then black is unable to get king c7 ideas, and his coordination is just very poor overall. So we're going to be castling next, bring this rook to e1, this one from the corner, and yeah, it's just a very lovely scenario to be in. So yeah, instead of this, the other move that's a little bit more serious, it's bishop to b4. I want to quickly mention that bishop to e7 will transpose to the 5 bishop e7 move order that we will have a look on, and also black can play c5, but after knight g2, cd4 queen d4, bishop c5, and queen f4. We will transpose to the main lines from the other move order with 5 c5, and then takes on d4 followed by knight b to d7 on the 7th move. So yeah, just making you aware that this is another way of getting into those positions. So now we can continue with our lines. After bishop b4, this is sort of a win-aware kind of move, getting the bishop to b4, although the pawn structure does not really have anything to do with the win-aware. I like to refer to this bishop b4 move as kind of win-aware bishop. And now we will be playing knight e2, preparing to castle shot. And after both sides castles, black usually pushes e5, because otherwise there's not really much point to his setup. And we can just continue with something like either bishop to g5 directly, or knight e4, just trade a pair of knights, push c3, then we just have this very nice bishop versus this bad bishop. Black goes e5, trying to equalize on the spot, but we can go bishop g5. This is a very strong move here. And black has a choice at this point. And again, there are like not many games from this position, but just so you can get a better understanding of how the game could go, I've covered plenty of alternatives. And here black has a choice between c6, bishop e7, and rook e8. If rook e8, I really like knight d5, hitting the b4 bishop and putting pressure on the f6 knight. And after bishop d6, I like knight g3, with the idea to get a knight to f5 possibly, if we are allowed to. And after takes, even stronger, it becomes to just go knight h5, going full focus mode on this knight on f6. So in order for black to defend it, they try bishop to e5, but now white has a very strong move. And by the way, this was a game played between Yordaman 4H with the white pieces against Savchenko. And in that game, white failed to find the best move, but here, bishop to g4 would have been really strong, eliminating one of the key defenders of the f6 knight. And after h6, this, again, I try to come up with a move for black. It's really hard to find anything decent at this point, but h6 looks kind of logical, but we can just take. And after takes on f6, we can ruin black structure, and then just collect the pawn with a completely winning position, as knight f6 is gonna come on the next move. So white would just be winning here. Instead of this rook e8 move, black would also just go for c6, but against c6 we have knight e4, and after bishop e7 we have a key idea. We will be taking on f6, only move to take with the bishop, because if you take with the knight, then the e5 pawn would have dropped. So now we take, and after queen takes, again only move to keep the e5 pawn defended, but now white has this super strong move, d5, breaking this c6 structure. And now we're basically just going to be lengthening that diagonal for our f3 bishop. So after something like taking on d5, knight b6, we can just play this very strong queen a5. We can follow up with something like knight to g3, followed by rook fe1, which is a very pleasant position for white, because again, black is struggling to develop that light squared bishop. So instead of c6, black would also break the pin immediately with bishop to e7. But then we're going to be playing this knight g3 move, again introducing knight f5 ideas. And after h6, we will be keeping the bishop. We're not going to do anything silly like taking on f6. So just bishop e3 here. And after rook e8, this move is meant to meet knight f5 with bishop to f8. So very natural. Rook e1, again, just going to be making small useful moves. And now black has a choice between the aggressive bishop b4 and playing the more solid, I would say, bishop to f8. Bishop b4 was played in a game. Bishop f8 is a new move that I've covered. Here, I just like to make this small move again, h3. And if black goes c6, you're familiar with this key idea of pushing d5, opening up the position for our bishop. And in case of e d4, we can just take with the bishop. And after the rook trade and c5, we have a very strong move here. We can just take on f6. It's important to avoid bishop e3, knight e5, because now black's position is becoming quite active. So staying on f6 is best. We can afford giving up the bishop because we're getting a very active position. And after knight takes, we can play rook d1. And despite having a very symmetrical position, our bishop on f3 is having a lot of pressure on that b7 pawn. And white has very annoying pressure, I would say. Instead of this, bishop b4 could also be a move in this position, but queen d3 is very strong, preparing to bring the rook to d1, and after c6, a3, hitting the bishop. We're quite happy to take that bishop pair, and white just has a very nice advantage here with the two bishops, and with this nice pawns in the center. So I think that should pretty much be it about all this knight b to d7 move, and we can move on to the other sidelines that black has, and one of them is to go for knight c6 here. This move is again connected with pushing for e5, and has been seen sometimes in online chess, and has been occasionally tried by grandmasters, so it's definitely something to be aware of. Here we can just play the normal knight e2 move. Just keep in mind that black is threatening to take the pawn, so we are defending our d4 pawn. And now black usually plays e5. Bishop d6 can also transpose to d5, bishop d6 lines, and we will cover that when we will be looking at the fifth move, bishop d6. So after e5, now we can just take on c6, and here there's no need to rush and grab on e5 immediately, because we can just castle first and the same threat remains. And here if black takes on d4, it's just a much better version for white, as we can take with a knight, and the c6 pawn is under attack. Rook e1 is quite a major threat on the next move, and black is just having a lot of problems in this current position. So taking on d4 would not be very wise here. Therefore, a bit better for black to play either bishop d6 or e4. After e4, white has a very nice positional move. We can just play c4, controlling the d5 square, getting this nice pawn center, and then we can just develop our knight to c3. The line could go bishop e7, knight c3, castles, knight g3, hitting the e4 pawn, and after bishop g2. Important to keep the queen on d2, despite the fact that we are blocking the c1 bishop, but we are keeping this d4 guy under protection, so that's really important. Black can play queen d7, but after h3, bishop e6, can just play b3, defend that c4 pawn, and after rook d8, can play knight e2, defending the pawn, and game could continue like bishop b2, rook a d1. Black has long-term problems with the e4 pawn. So instead of e4, here bishop d6 is another way of playing for black, but then we can just take on e5, and after bishop takes, we're going for the endgame, play rook d1. Pretty awkward move for black to meet. Bishop d7 has to be played, but after knight c3, black can try to activate the rook down to b5, but we can simply annihilate it by pushing b3, and there's simply nothing going on the a1 h8 diagonal. And after king c8, can just get rid of that strong e5 bishop with bishop f4. White just has a very nice push in the upcoming positions with knight d3 and potentially jumping to c5 or e5. And yeah, we just have a very nice position overall because of the enemy damaged pawn structure. So yeah, again, I think this is pretty much what you need to know about this knight c6 sideline. And with that being said, we can move on to 5c6, which is meant to kind of block our f3 bishop, but on the other hand, it's also making it quite tough for the black light square bishop. And that's a bit of a harder way to put it. I mean, this bishop on c8 is just gonna be very passive. So you can just play knight e2, and after b6, you can play c4. Again, pretty common idea. When we can get this is quite nice. Bishop b7, knight c3, and after bishop d6, this is one of the lines where we like to actually go for castling long, because black has not done anything, very concrete that is influencing the center. So when black is playing in this fashion that it gives us many options, usually we can consider castling long. So queen c2 is very strong, and after castles, bishop g5, again very active move, 97, we can just castle. We can continue with king b1, and then throw in our pawns on the king side with g4 and h4, with just very nice position for white. So again, I think that's just a very quick way to fix this c6 move. And now we can move on to something a little bit more serious. Still quite rare, but I feel like this line with bishop e7 is very underrated. And if you somehow are a French player that is randomly checking out 1e4 repertoire, I think this could be a potentially good line for black to play against bishop to d3 French, even though I still feel like white has an interesting try to play for an advantage that I will show. But again, I feel like most of the bishop d3 players that have not studied this repertoire won't really be able to find the optimal moves. So I think this is interesting to play for black. So on bishop e7, we're going to be playing knight e2, castles, and now c5 is really the way to go for black. Knight bd7 is a bit of a more passive approach, with the idea that after knight c3, black simply plays rook b8 with the idea to go b5 and then try to get this bishop activated with bishop to b7. Here we can just play queen d3, very strong prophylactical moves, keeping an eye on the b5 square. And if black just tries this humble b6 move with the same idea of playing bishop to b7, we have a very strong move. We can play knight to b5. And if black goes for the naive a6, guess what? We're just going to be going all the way to a7. And then this knight is looking forward to reach the c6 square. And white is just getting a very nice positional advantage. After both bishop b7, we can take and play knight c6, and also we can just play knight c6 right off the bat, or we can take and then also collect the a6 pawn. So just so many options for white here. Instead of this, after knight b5, black could try to beat the knight with bishop a6. Now we can just defend it with a4, and after e5, knight g3 is very strong. If pawn takes, you can take with a queen. After bishop b7, you can just trade the bishops. But after knight f5, the knight is actually very strong here, and it's putting pressure on the e7 bishop. Play could continue like c6, but after this move, we get the b6 square. The knight e6, bishop takes, queen takes, having both very active queen and a very annoying knight. So black is really struggling in this position. So instead of b6, black could also try a6, reinforcing the threat of pushing b5. Well, we can just go for the prophylactic a4 again. And after e5, rook d1 is very strong, activating our rook. Then bishop d6, knight g3, introducing knight f5 ideas. Black can take on d4 and play knight e5, but then can simply avoid that threat of knight takes on f3 by stepping back with the bishop to e2. And on knight c6, I really like getting my queen to h4, and we're both having ideas of either bishop g5 or, in this particular case, bishop f4, because bishop on d6 is pinned. Now we can mate rook e8 with bishop to f4, and next thing, we will take on d6 and create quite a weak pawn there that we can attack. So white has a very nice pressure here, and with that being said, I think we can move on to the more critical c5 move. And now we will play knight c3. Black goes knight c6, hitting the d4 pawn once again. But we can play bishop e3, defend it. And in this position, black has a choice between taking on d4 and queen a5. I believe queen a5 is a very interesting way of playing, although I still feel like white has an interesting try here with d takes on c5. And if black, for example, goes for the simple takes on c5, rook d8 is also a move, by the way, in this position. But if black goes for a simple bishop takes on c5, we can just trade. I like this knight e4 move. And after rook d8, we can just sidestep with queen c1. And yeah, black can play the solid bishop d7, e5 is also a move. After e5, knight g3 though, bishop e6, c3, just controlling both b4 and d4 squares. Something like queen b6 can get played after queen c2, hitting the h7 pawn, and rook f1, threatening to take on c6, and then this pawn will drop. I feel like white just has the easier play here. So even though it might be hard to get an objective advantage, I feel like it's way easier to play this as white. And if black sticks with the solid approach of playing bishop d7 here, we can go c3. Again, this is just a very nice move to have in this structure. After rook c8, rook d1, bishop e8, queen c2, hitting the h7 pawn. So black usually goes h6. But here I feel like white again gets very good practical pressure after taking and playing rook d1. And yes, this might not be the refutation of the French, but we will have long-term pressure on the queen side with this 3-against-2 majority. So imagine we manage to trade the heavy pieces, we get rooks off, we get queens off, and then if we can somehow get a passer on that side and somehow put pressure on the king side, most of the king and pawn endgames will be winning for white. So yeah, keep that in mind, and I think again white just gets very nice pressure without taking any risks, basically. So that would be my recommendation against bishop takes on c5. Just take and play knight e4. If black goes for the tricky rook d8, here it's important to remember this queen e1 move. And again, I just want to quickly mention that if you're struggling to memorize these variations, make sure to take advantage of the move trainer technology, because that is a really helpful tool that Chessable has, and I think it will help you maximize the potential of this repertoire, and it will just make your learning experience much better overall. So in this position after queen e1, we are introducing all kinds of tactical ideas of taking on c6, then followed by knight d5, because if black will take on e1, we will take on e7. So if you're a little bit confused by these lines, let's actually dive a little bit deeper so you can get a better understanding of what I mean. So if black goes knight e5, already you can notice that the queen on a5 is no longer protected. So now knight d5 becomes actually a very strong move, hitting the queen. And the key idea is that when black takes on e1, we get to take on e7 with check. And due to this intermezzo, white is doing very well. And there's just a very nice tactical theme to have in your toolkit. So after king f8, we can just recapture. Black can take on after intermezzo as well. But after king takes, we can just play c4, take away the d5 square from the enemy knight, and yeah, we're just having a position where we are up a pawn and we have a 4-against-2 majority on the queen side, which in a normal world will result to connected passers. So that would be pretty hard to stop, if not impossible. So white is doing very well, and yeah, instead of knight e5, black could also try taking on c5, but then we have another tricky idea. Can take on c6 and then go knight d5. Same idea. On queen 1, we will be taking on f6 this time, and after pawn takes, it's just better to take with the a rook, as the f rook will be useful on that f5. After the bishop trade, the f6 pawn is now under attack, and this endgame actually is way more dangerous than it might look at first glance, because I've been clicking through the buttons here, and I feel like it's very easy to get in trouble. And there are many ways to deal with the threat over the f6 pawn. Black could go for the aggressive rook d2, can just play f5, can also play bishop to a6. I think we'll start with bishop a6, and we can just take on f6, and after rook d2 play rook f2. Black now usually just takes on c2, recapturing his pawn, but we can just play knight c3. This is really important because now after rook d8 threatening to infiltrate on d2, we have this safe move, playing rook d1, and in this upcoming endgames, I feel like white is just having very nice pressure, because this king is way closer to the action. We can just try to get our king into d4. The knight is also playing around quite nicely, and black has this ugly pawns. Again, this is not winning by force or anything, but I feel like white just has very nice pressure. Instead of bishop a6, black would also play f5 as I said, and we can just go knight g3, meet bishop a6 with rook f2. And after rook d7, the key idea to make progress is to break the structure with e4. And most of the people would take on e4, and then after knight takes, threatening a massive fork on f6, rook d4. You can just play rook f3. We have ideas with rook g3 and also just play b3, c4, shutting down the enemy bishop on the queen side with a very nice h4 right. But also if black finds the more precise rook d8 move here, have this very nice h4 move, just creating a square for our king. In the case of rook d1, can trade a pair of rooks, breaking h2. And after taking on e4, again, just white has a much nicer endgame because we have two pawn islands against basically 4 pawn islands. So white just has a very nice structural advantage. Instead of f5, another interesting move that black has is to go for this super active rook d2 move. But we have knight d4, and this is connected with very nice tactical trick. After c5, we have this nice intermezzo with rook e2. And after rook takes, knight takes bishop a6. Notice that black is not only attacking the e2 knight, but also threatening to infiltrate with the rook via d8 and then to d2. So it's really important to play king f2, and not only defending the knight, but also preparing to meet rook d8 with king e1, making sure that there will be no entry squares for black. And yeah, now white just has a very nice static advantage. All the endgames arising after bishop takes, king takes f5, rook f4 are just very dangerous for black. We can just play rook a4 and then rook a5, keeping an eye on both pawns. And yeah, I think black is already quite close to losing, even though there might still be some work to do. So instead of c5, e5 is also possible, but same idea applies. We're gonna be playing this intermezzo with rook e2, and then after bishop a6, king f2 remains the key move. Then we get our king to e1, and after king g7, if black does not take on e2, we can just play rook f2, breaking the pin and threatening to activate a knight. Whoopsie, I cannot really draw any arrows. With the idea to activate a knight via g3 and f5, with just a very nice endgame for white. So yeah, I think that should be pretty much it about this tricky queen a5 move, and we can move on to the lines after bishop e3, where black takes on d4. So this is definitely something that you can face, and I think a lot of players are usually just taking on d4, but now white is getting nice positions, as you will see. Knight takes on d4, and there are basically two people here. There are basically two type of persons. Let's say those people that take on d4 and those that play knight to e5. And in case of knight takes on d4, again, just take with a queen. We're getting really nice endgames, and yeah, if they try to be tricky with like queen a5, bishop f4 is very strong, and after rook d8, we're gonna be playing queen e5 again, just forcing queens off. If queen b6, just gonna go queen c7, making sure that the queens will get traded no matter what. And after bishop takes, rook d7, bishop g3, we can play rook fd1 while we have all kinds of knight d7 to c5 ideas. And just look at this poor bishop on c8 that is guarding the b7 pawn for the rest of the game. So white is just in a very good shape here. If black does go for queen takes on d4, we can just collect with the bishop. If bishop d7, just take on b7. Rook b8, bishop a6, very precise. Rook b2 is not a great move because we have this nice tactic with knight d5, creating a double attack on the e7 bishop and the b2 rook. So white is just winning material here, and instead of this bishop d7 move, rook to d8 could be played, but we can just get in rook 8 d1, and in order to shut down our bishop, black has to go for knight d5, because again, just going a6 is leading to very uncomfortable positions for black after knight a4, heading towards b6, so knight d7 has to be played, but now c4 is a very nice move, and after rook b8 we have this very strong c5, and black's pieces are completely shut down on the queen side. So it is just much better. Therefore, the lesser evil would be to play knight d5, but we can just take it, and after pawn takes, play c3, fix this pawn on d5, and after bishop e6, I just like to play g3, throw in h4, and if rook c8, we can just play rook d2, bishop c5, rook f d1, with long-term pressure on this pawn on d5, with no risks for white whatsoever. So this would be, again, quite a nice scenario for us. And with that being said, I think we have covered the relevant lines that could arise after knight takes on d4. Again, just remember, you go for the endgames, and usually there are many ways to get an advantage once you get this typical endgames in. So black could also go for knight e5, as I was saying. But now we will be playing queen e2. This is the standard move, preparing to bring the rook to d1. And generally, I do feel like this type of positions are way safer for black than, compared to those where those from the main lines. I'm basically referring to because in the main lines we get this queen e2 followed by long castle lines that are very dangerous for black. But here, this is one of the very few lines when black can actually force us to go short, and then he can go for knight e5. But still, the play is not as simple as it looks for black, because we can go queen e2, preparing rook to d1. Now black takes. Just keep in mind that black will always take once we waste the tempo on playing queen e2. So now black takes and plays a6, but after rook d1, threatening knight takes on e6, black has to sidestep. Now we have this very strong rook fe1 move, preparing to play bishop f4, hitting the enemy queen without allowing black to push e5. And now after bishop d7, bishop f4, black has a choice between queen b6 or queen c8. If queen c8, we have a very nice move exploiting the fact that our rook is very active on the e file. We can play knight f5. After the pawn takes, rook takes on e7, have a much better position because of the super active rook. And after queen b6, hitting the b2 pawn, we actually have a very nice way to defend it. We can just play bishop e5, and now queen takes b2 is running into some brilliant tactics. After knight f5, hitting the bishop on e7. If pawn takes knight e5, is just devastating. For example, the e7 bishop is now under attack. Also, the queen is hanging on b2. If queen a3 is tried, you can just take on f6, and queen takes on f3. We'll run into knight takes on e7 check, intermezzo. We really captured the queen, and then also the d7 bishop will be hanging. So white is just completely winning here. And instead of this, black would try to play rook f to d8, but after queen to g3, we're setting up another brilliant attack. As for example, if black sticks with a very normal rook ac8, you can just go knight f5, and white is completely winning here. For example, if pawn takes on f5, you just go knight d5, hitting both the e7 bishop and the queen, and also putting pressure on the f6 knight. So if, for example, queen h6 gets played, you can just take on f6 with the bishop, and you can see that black's pieces are getting overloaded on the e file. So white is simply winning here, and therefore there was a game in correspondence chess where they came out with this knight h5 idea, which is kind of holdable, but still after queen h3, knight f6, rook d3, white had very nice attacking chances in the correspondence game that was eventually drawn in Rodriguez against Bonai in correspondence chess in 2019. But again, I really feel like it's so tough for black to deal with all kind of tricks that white has on the king side. So I feel like this could be potentially a very good try for white. And that is pretty much it about this bishop to e7 move on the fifth move. As I said, this is a bit of an underrated line in my opinion. I think this is played quite rarely, but I think it's having quite okay objective evaluation, especially in those lines that I've showed with c5 and then playing for this quick rook d8 lines. But yeah, Anyways, we can move on to the last sideline before we jump into the main c5 stuff. So here black would also just play this bishop d6 move, which is connected to e5, to the e5 push at some point. This is like very similar to the knight bd7 lines that we've just seen. But yeah, I mean, it's just, they can even transpose at some point, as I will show you. After bishop d6, I like knight c3. I think you could also play knight e2, but this is a bit nicer because sometimes knight b5 could be a move hitting that bishop. Here black usually goes for c6, but castles and knight b2 d7 are also fine. If c6, avoiding knight to b5, then we can just play knight e2, and after castle short, we can castle short knight bd7. We're having this type of positions where our bishop is active on f3. Yes, a bit restricted by the c6 pawn for now, but this bishop on c8 is just totally dead. So just a bit nicer to be white here. You can play knight g3, and black breaks with e5. This is the common idea. But now, as you've seen in the knight b2 d7 line, we have this key idea of lengthening the diagonal for our bishop with d5. After pawn takes, knight takes, knight takes, bishop takes, knight f6. We can just play bishop to g5, pin the knight, and after bishop e7, we are quite happy to give up the bishop pair and play c4, because it's gonna be really hard for black to get rid of our powerful bishop, and when black tries to do that, we can get, at the very least, a very dangerous passed pawn. So this is very nice for white. In case of knight b2 d7, we can play knight g2 e2, castles, and black can go e5 now. If, for example, rook to b8, with the idea to play b6 followed by bishop to b7, or also just push b5, you can just go knight b5 immediately, which is not only hitting the d6 bishop, but also keep an eye on this e7 pawn. So after a6, you can just get a bishop pair, play c4, and white just has a very nice game here with the bishop pair. We can play knight g3, rook e1, and yeah, then we can potentially even play something like b3 followed by bishop a3, hitting this d6 pawn with a very nice position for white. If after castles, black plays e5, we're going to be developing our bishop to e3, and in case of ed4, knight e4, knight e5, normally bishop e2 is the standard move to kind of keep your bishop and also avoid knight c4. Here is just much stronger to play knight b5, and we can trade this light square bishop for the enemy dark square one. And after knight f3, queen f3, black can try to keep it with bishop to e5, but we have a very strong move to bring our rook into the game with tempo. We can play rook a d1, and after queen e7, keep in mind that black has a massive threat of going bishop to g4, so we can just play h3, getting rid of it, and after this c6 move, attacking the knight. You could retreat with the standard knight d4, but I actually like the tricky rook f1 a bit more, with the idea that after cb5, bishop f4, knight d7, queen d5, we are regaining the piece with a slightly better position, as rook e8 fails to keep the material, because here I have a very strong move. You can just take one e5 with a rook, and if queen takes, we can take, and then go for the back ranker. So white just wins here, and instead of knight b to d7, black could also try to castle right away, and after knight g to e2, black can either push e5 immediately in this position, or go c6. If c6, I just like bishop g5, creating a very unpleasant pin. So black usually answers it by playing knight b to d7, but now we can actually go for queen d2, preparing long castle, as black's play was a little bit slow, and it gives us the right timing to go for this. After queen a5, we can castle, and now best move for black would be to go knight d5, trying to force things on the queen side, as h6 does not achieve much, since I can just push h4. And I want you to remember this idea. This is usually very strong in these opposite castling positions. black is never really able to take on g5. I mean, yes, it's up a piece, but this is gonna be very unpleasant initiative that white gets on the h file, because knight has to move away and white just gets a very nice attack. So this is never really a thing to take, so white has nice position after h4. So here, knight d5 is a better move, but after a3, very strong move. Keep in mind that bishop b4 was quite problematic, that's why a3 is strong. And again, like any bishop takes on a3, not achieving much, as we can just take and then play king b1. So knight b6, finding knight c4 can be met with this knight e4, offering an interesting endgame, as after queen takes, bishop takes, bishop e7. You can just play king b1 and now knight c4. We can actually keep our bishop with bishop to c1. And I feel like white should be a little bit better in this queenless middle game, although it's still like a very complex position. But you know, my way of thinking here is that this bishop on f3 way more active than this one on c8. So I feel like from a human perspective, we should have a small edge. So yeah, that's pretty much it about this c6 line. We can just go for bishop g5 followed by queen to d2, but black could be a bit more aggressive and go for e5 immediately. In this case, there's no time to go for that bishop g5 and castle zone anymore. But we can just go for the endgame. After takes, we can trade queens, just play bishop d2. And a very nice idea after c6 is to not rush with castle, because that will allow some knight g4 ideas, but just play h3, which is not only a prophylactical move against knight g4, but also preparing to push g4, which is a typical way of grabbing space on the king side, as we can just mid bishop e6 with castles long, and after knight b7, we can push g4, and we can then advance even further with g5 and h4, with a slightly better endgame for white, I would say. This is very similar to those Petrov lines with the trendy knight d3 and those endgames with 22. If you know what I mean. So after knight g2, e2, I think we've covered everything that it was. As I said, we've seen c6, bishop g5, queen d2, castle long, and against d5. We're quite happy to go for this endgame. Go bishop d2, make sure to play h3 and then castle long, and you should be good to go. So with that being said, I think we got a very good understanding of the sidelines, and we can now move on to the more theoretical stuff arising after the move c5. So after c5, hitting the center, we're going to be developing the knight to e2. And here black, most of the times will just play knight to c6. But there are also some alternatives, as I've noticed quite a lot of players, especially in lower rated brackets, taking on d4 in this position. And we will be now covering after queen takes on d4. I wanted to say that most of them will play the inferior queen takes on d4. This is leading to some very thematical endgames that are generally just very nice, as we have seen a little bit earlier in the video, and also thinking about it now, we're having this endgames where our bishop on f3 is just very nice compared to the other one on c8, because this one is just exerting a lot of pressure on the b7 pawn, and it makes it very hard for the other one to actually develop. So instead of this, we're going to be quickly going over what happens if black avoids the queen trade by playing knight b to d7. And this could be a clever idea for black, especially if you get surprised by this, because black is preparing to play bishop to c5 and the positions are not so standard. But if you remember what to do, I think white is doing very well. And the way to start is by playing knight c3, and after bishop to c5, the best move is to go queen to f4, taking away the c7 square away from the enemy queen. And here, after queen to e7, queen g3 is very strong, hitting the g7 pawn. Black now can either go for castles or play g6. G6 is actually quite a bad move, because we can just play bishop h6. The enemy king is caught in the center. This bishop is quite bad on c8. And white is just doing very well, and therefore castle short is a better move, but we can play bishop h6, threatening to mate. Knight e8 is forced, but now we can just castle long, and after king h8, threatening to take our bishop, because the pawn is no longer pinned now, but we can just play bishop e3 here, and if black goes for bishop takes on e3, white will recapture with the pawn, and after knight b6, rook to d4 is a very strong move, preparing to double the rooks, and in case black plays e5, then knight d5 is very strong, hitting the queen. If queen e6, we can just retreat with queen d1, but now we managed to win the d5 square. So after knight takes, bishop takes, queen e7, we can just play knight to c3, and we can continue with rook to e1, and yeah, white just has a very nice pressure, because we're controlling this d5 square. Instead of taking on e3 in this position, black would also play bishop d6, hitting our queen. We can just sidestep with queen h3, and after knight b6, king b1 is a very nice move, and after e5, hitting our queen, we can just play g4, and this g4 move is not only dealing with a threat over the queen, but it's also stopping or making harder for black to get in this f5 push. As for example, if black plays f5 now, we can just take and play bishop g4, and after the trade of the light square bishops, white is just having a very nice pressure, because we can continue with like knight e4, and also play like rook g1 with pressure on the g file. So white has a nice advantage here, and I think this is enough to cover the lines after the 7th, knight b to d7. And with that being said, we can move on to the typical endgames arriving after queen takes on d4. Black goes for the queen trade. So after queen e4, knight e4, black has either a6 or bishop to c5 at his disposal. a6 is really the main move, because after bishop c5, knight b5 is quite problematic to face, and now black has to play knight a6 in order to deal with this threat of going knight c7. But now white has this very strong a3 move with the idea to push b4, and in case of short castle, I can play knight c3, and if e5, bishop g5 is very strong, hitting this knight, threatening to double the pawns. Black tries to go for the complications with e4. We can just avoid taking, because there will be some cheeky rook e8 ideas to go for the pin, so just avoid that. And after bishop f5, we can just eliminate the knight, push b4, gain space on the queen side, and after bishop b6, we can finally activate our knight with knight d5. And black has just way too many weaknesses, as both knight f6 and knight to e7 check are two major threats. Also knight d6 ideas, just so many tempting moves for white. So instead of bishop c5, black, what really the black players are going for is the move a6. But here you actually have a very beautiful way to develop your knight, and you're not going to be playing knight to c3, as pretty much anyone would do. But we're going to be playing knight d2, and this is a bit more subtle, because the knight looks a little bit more passive than it would have been on c3 for the time being, but it has a hidden idea. Maybe not so hidden, but we're preparing to play knight c4, and then get a knight to the weak b6 square, which is the very annoying pressure on the queen side. So here, after knight e2, black can play bishop e7 or bishop c5. In case of bishop e7, we can just go knight c4, threatening knight b6. So black goes knight e7, but then bishop f4 is very strong. And after castles, we can castle long, which is a very nice position, because black's pieces are completely stuck. Instead of bishop e7, black goes for the aggressive bishop c5, hitting our knight. You can just play knight d3, attacking the bishop. And after bishop a7, we can go knight a5. This is a very nice move, hitting the b7 pawn, and if black goes knight d5, you can just castle, and after bishop b6, just make sure to keep your knight defended on a5, with knight b3, reinforcing the knight. And after knight c6, we can just trade a pair of knights, go c4. Black is forced to go to e7, but now bishop 8, e3 is very strong. And for example, if black goes for the trade on e3, we will have all kinds of ideas to play, like pawn takes and then knight a5 to hit this pawn, which is very nice pressure for white. So yeah, I think that should pretty much be it about this lines. As I said, if black takes knight d4, having a massive threat of knight b5, so they usually play a6, but now that knight d2 is actually very clever, and black is just having a very hard time to deal with these ideas, getting the knight to c4 and then to b6. So yeah, I think if you remember, this idea should be good to go. And with that being said, we can advance to another small alternative that black has in this position. And this is not as popular as staying on d4, but you could maybe run into this at some point. And this idea is quite similar to what they usually play after knight c6, bishop e3, and then e5. Black can also go for e5 in this position. And I've called this the turbo version of the 7e5 endgame. But yeah, I feel like white is just getting a nice advantage after taking. Black goes knight g4, that is really the point. And now we can eliminate the knight, play f3, taking the bishop, and after bishop f5. Black does have some compensation, but I think white should be better after we manage to stabilize. So knight g3 is important, hitting the f5 bishop. And there are basically two main ideas for black to play this position. One of them is to go to e6 and the other one is to g6. With bishop e6, I just like knight e4, activating the knight, and after knight c6, bishop f4. Castles, we can just play king e1. Very precise move. Because if you go to e2, then knight to d4 check can be an issue. So knight b4, not really a problem. You can just play knight e3, defending the c2 pawn. So bishop e7. We can now play king e2 because there is no longer the knight e2 threat looming. And yeah, black is just struggling here because he's just down a pawn. So instead of this, bishop g6 could look a little bit more natural, you may argue. But now we can just go bishop g5, really important move. And now it's going to be really tricky for black to develop because the reserved bishop to e7 will result in a bishop trade. And after h6, we can just play bishop h4. And after knight c6, we can just defend our pawn with rook e1. Black can try bishop h7, threatening to trap our bishop with g5. But knight e4 is just very strong. And in case of g5 now, you play bishop g3. And white, again, seems to be just up a pawn. So I see little to no compensation for black, and I feel like white is having very good winning chances. So with that being said, I think we can now move on to the more theoretical stuff arising after knight e2, knight c6, hitting the d4 pawn. Here the automatic move that you need to be making is bishop to e3, defending our pawn, and this is really where the theory really starts. And you can take a mental screenshot of this and this position as an overview of black alternatives. I will try to name them right now. So e5 is one of the main lines that is forcing us to take on e5 and play this position after knight g4. So this is really one of the key positions that you need to understand in order to be playing this 3 bishop d3 French successfully. Instead of this, black also has a choice of going for this knight d5. And again, this could be potentially a very dangerous line if you're not prepared against it. But here, white just has a very nice sequence of taking on d5. And after queen takes knight c3, queen g2 is kind of forced, rook g1, queen h2, bishop f4. And this is again really where the theory really starts in this line after bishop f4, where black has a choice between queen h5 or queen h3 that are holding. But just keep in mind that after queen h3, knight b5, we have this common theme that white is going for the fork on c7. So this would be d7 knight d5 line, and the very concrete stuff where black takes on g2. That is another big line. And yeah, I've also covered like queen b6 here, but that's not really so mainstream. Bishop e7 also not very popular. taking on d4, obviously the most played move in the position. So I think that's already quite a good summary of this. We will be leaving c takes on d4 as the last move, and yeah, now we will start covering the endgame. So if we go back here, black goes for e5. This is a very serious line that you need to really understand, because when I first started picking up this line, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was kind of neglecting this as there were very few games with this move. But from that point of view, it really developed, and there are actually a lot of strong players that are going for this. And if you're doing a lot of study here and you're following the theory that I gave, I think you can get a really nice edge against your opponents. So the idea is to take on c6. I want to quickly mention that at first in my blitz games, I was doing this very silly thing of just taking on e5. My brain was basically shutting down for a second. But if you take on e5, I think this is an instructive mistake to point out white is taking and then takes on e5. Black is ready to take on f3, and you're already much worse as white. So just make sure that after e5, you're taking on c6 first, and then after pawn takes, we take on e5. Black goes for the trade and then plays knight g4. And now I find knight d2 to be the best move for white. And this is where really black has a bunch of alternatives. I've covered pretty much all the playable options. Again, you don't really need to remember all of these lines by heart, but again, I think looking over these lines is just going to give you a very good understanding of how the play goes in general. And yeah, if you just use the move trainer technology as well, and you start getting more familiar with this type of positions, I think you'll just become very comfortable and start crushing people in this line. So I think we'll start with bishop a6 here. Black can also take, can also play bishop e7, and you know, also knight d3, knight d5 playable alternatives. But bishop a6, we're gonna see at first, but after this, you can just go knight f3, defending our e5 pawn, and after castle long, king e1. If black plays rook e8, then we have a very strong move, rook to c1, prophylactical move with the idea that knight takes on e5 will be met with knight takes and c4. This bishop is out of the game, and these pawns are potentially weak, especially the c5 one. So I think that white just has a very nice small edge here in the endgame. So bishop a6, not really that big of a problem. Black can also take on e3, but yeah, then it's gonna be a little bit harder to win back the pawn. But black is playing for compensation here after pawn takes on e3. The idea is to play g6, preparing to go by g7. Here I like knight f4, and after bishop g7, knight e3, defending the e5 pawn and also attacking the c5 one. Here black castles, and now rook f1 is very precise, bringing the rook to the semi-open file. Black activates the bishop with bishop a6, threatening to take and then pick up the e5 pawn. So again, like a very common way of playing here for white is just to shut down that a6 bishop with c4. And yeah, whenever you do this, you can see that our knights are kind of dominating black's bishop, so it's a very instructive theme. If rook e8 gets played, you can just go king c2, and after bishop takes on e5, we can take that bishop, and after rook takes, we can push e4. And our knight is just doing a very good job in defending these two pawns, and we can continue with rook f3, rook f1, and then potentially swing this rook over the third rank with a slightly better endgame for white. Instead of taking on e3 with a knight, black could also play bishop e7, but then knight g3 was very strong, preparing to play rook e1 and also having knight e4 ideas. Here black can either take the pawn on e5 or take on e3. If they take on e3, you can take with a pawn, and after castles, king e2 is very strong, connecting our rooks. In case of bishop g4, you can just play knight f3, and after f6, I just like to give back the pawn by playing h3, because if black takes on f3, we can just take with a king. Also taking with a pawn is fine, but taking with the king is seems to be the easiest. And then we're going to be getting the knight to e4. We'll have a good knight against bad bishop. So after h3, really the serious move for black is to play bishop e6, introducing some bishop c4 check ideas. But now very strong is just to give back the pawn with knight e2, controlling that square. And after pawn takes, just go b3. Again, just very prophylactic chess. Rook d8, can play rook f1. And we would be happy to just trade both rooks and then bring our king to d3, get this knight to e4, this knight to c4. Just a lot of pressure against black's pawns. So knight g3, black can also take on e5 with a knight, but then we're going to be activating our rook with this rook e1 move. You can see that black already has some problems with his pieces on the e file. As for example, after castle's knight e4, we are putting a lot of pressure on the c5 pawn. And here, if black goes knight d7, we just have the same c4 idea. Very strong move. Preparing to bring the king to c2 and also making sure that this bishop will not really activate via a6. So after f5, we can play knight c3, and f4 is not really a problem here since we can just take it with a bishop, and then this one on e7 will be hanging. So black better tries to play bishop f6, so we can just go bishop f4, avoid any tricks now. Keep in mind that black was threatening to take there and then push f4. So just go bishop f4 yourself, and after bishop d4, hitting the f2 pawn, we can play f3. If bishop a6, just king c2 is very nice. We can play rook e8 with rook to d1. And again, white just has a very tiny edge, but quite a stable one. And long term, it's just very dangerous, strategically speaking, for black. So instead of bishop e7, black would also try bishop f5. Again, playing for compensation. After h3, knight takes on e3. We can just take with a pawn. In case of rook d8, rook f1 is very strong, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop is on f5 and we can gain a tempo. If bishop e6, knight f4, very strong move again. Black can play bishop c4 because the knight is pinned, but then rook f2 is very strong. Bishop e7, just king e1, and after bishop e6, knight e4. And yeah, again, white has a lot of activity for his pieces, and I just fail to see black's compensation. So I think we can stop here and say that white is doing very well. And if after h3, black does go for taking the pawn immediately, we can go f4, hitting the knight, and then we can gain another tempo with g4, hitting the bishop, bishop d7. We get another tempo with f5, and that's knight e5, another one, bishop f4, hitting the e5 knight, and after bishop d6, just play knight g3. The idea is now that we're going to be getting the knight e4, black can castle, but after knight e4, bishop b8, I find bishop takes e5 to be the simplest way of getting an edge. After bishop takes king e2, we can continue with knight c4 on the next move. And yeah, white is doing very well. Keep in mind that if black takes on b2, that will simply activate our rook with rook b1, and then we will be playing the same knight c4 with a big initiative. So I think we can now move on to what happens if black takes on e5 right off the bat here after our knight e2 move. If black takes on e5, gonna be activating the rook with rook e1. Again, I find this to be the most precise move, and I've covered two main options here for black. One of them is to go bishop a6, and the other one is bishop e7. In case of bishop e7, I like knight e4, hitting the c5 pawn, and if knight g4, we can take on c5. Very strong move, because after f5, we can just take on e7, king e7, and now super precise. We have h3, and now after all this forced sequence, we can take on g4, and after rook f8, we just have a very nice f3 move. Main point being that after he takes pawn takes king d6, there is this key knight g1 move, defending everything. And by the way, if you're looking for more details about this position, make sure to check out the Tria Pisco game against Escalante from the Model Games chapter that I covered, because it's about this particular line from this current position that you see on the board. Also, instead of taking on G4 and playing Rook F8, Black would also take, but then King D2 is very strong, bringing the King to E3, and White has a very big advantage. So, yeah, I think that should be it for this line. And after Rook E1, if Bishop A6 gets played, then Bishop F4 is very strong, hitting the knight. And after Knight G6, Knight G3, you can see that the Black King is already in some trouble as Bishop E7 runs into Bishop D6. So King has to move, but then we can just play Bishop E3, and after Knight H4, we can just defend our G2 pawn with Rook to G1. We're ready to play Knight G4. On the next move, then follow it up with C4, with just a very nice edge and the send game, because this pawn on C5 is really vulnerable. So, yeah, I think that should pretty much be it about this E5 move. Again, just take on C6, take on E5, go Knight D2, then Rook E1 if Black takes on E5. But as far as you go through these lines for a couple of times with the move trainer, I think you should be good to go. And we can now move on to the super concrete Knight D5. And again, this could be really dangerous, because if you allow Black to take on E3, then Black just has the bishop pair, and it's slightly better. But here, it's actually just super strong for White to take on D5, and Black has to take with a queen, as pawn takes, runs into D takes on C5, and White is just up a pawn. So after queen takes on D5, White gains the tempo with Knight C3, and now Black has to bite on G2. Because if queen H5, then we have the same theme with Knight B5, and after CD4, Knight C7, King E7. Here, I actually have an improvement over a very old Magnus Carlsen game. He played a game from this position where he was 13 years old. That went Knight takes on A8, but that is actually quite unclear after pawn takes on E3. But it's just better to play Bishop F4, and now game could go like Rook B8, but then after Knight takes on D4, White is just better in the upcoming positions. After E5, this is really the only move for Black to block the bishop. But we can just take on C6, take on E5, and after Rook B7, Black is saving the Rook, but we can go check and then castles. And we will manage to save our Knight on C7, and if Black does nothing, we can just play Rook E1 followed by Rook E8. With a better position for White. Therefore, after Knight C3, critical line, take on G2. Here we play Rook G1, and yeah, I think again quite forced. Queen takes on H2. Queen F3 has been played a few times, but is really not a great move, as we can just go Knight B5 with the idea to fork on C7, and after Rook B8, Knight C7, King D8. Simplest thing you can do, just go Knight B5 back, and Black has lost the right to castle. We're just planning to take on C5, have easy play, can castle long, and Black is just having way too many issues with his king. So after Rook G1, Queen H2, quite forced. Again, Bishop F4, forced move for White, attacking the queen and controlling the C7 square. And Black has to moves that are sort of good here. In terms of, they should be holding with best play, but the positions remain quite tricky. So those are Queen H5 and Queen H3. Those moves are holdable for Black. But we will start by covering the Queen H4 move, which is actually looking quite similar, but it's the only losing one. And after this, you can play Knight B5. Black tries this F6 idea, as you will see. This is a really weird line. Like, if you'd see this for the first time, I mean, this just looks like a total madness. I mean, White is getting this Knight to B5, then is winning the A8 Rook. And, I mean, White is up a free Rook. Yes, Black does get, like, 3 pawns for it, but, I mean, in what world are we living where 3 pawns are equal to a Rook? I mean, yes, but this is just, like, a very complex computerish line that Black has, and I'm a huge fan of White's position. Don't get me wrong, but still, it is not as simple summing things up that white will be up a rook and just winning. So we still have some precise moves to find. So after f6, knight c7 is quite good, and after king f7, we can take the rook, cd4, and in this position, queen d3 is very precise, and we can meet e5 with queen b3. That is one of the main ideas, because bishop e6 will run into queen takes on b7. If black goes for this check with bishop to b4, we can block with c3. After pawn takes, rook d8. Very strong move here is queen e4, sidestepping the attack and also preparing queen g2 ideas to hit the g7 pawn. So for example, after bishop a5, we're going queen g2, hitting g7, and after g5, black can save the pawn, but will no longer save the queen after rook h1. This queen is literally trapped, and white is winning material. So this is one illustrative line of why queen h4 is bad. Just go knight b5, and I think it should be good to go. And we can now move on to the more theoretical stuff, which is queen h3. Again, we're going to be playing knight b5, and really the only move that black has here is to go f6 with the idea to get this king to f7. So playing knight c7, black goes king f7, recollecting the rook. So far this is really forced, like up till this point. I think you can even blitz out these moves if you manage to learn them by going through the move trainer, obviously. So after knight takes on a8, cd4, here we can actually take, as you will see. This is quite an important difference when you compare this line with 11 queen h5. Because with that queen on h5, you can no longer take here, because black will have queen takes, rook takes, then we'll have knight takes, rook takes, and then this fork with e5 equalizing. But this is no longer the case with the queen on h3. So we can take on d4, and after knight takes on d4, if black does go for the same thing with knight takes and e5, forking, have this very strong queen d5 move, and white just wins, as bishop e6 will be met with queen takes on b7 with a winning position. So the point here for black is after knight takes on d4 to play this bishop b4 move. And this check is actually really unpleasant to meet for white, as c3 is really the only playable move. But now you can see that the queen and the bishop are cooperating quite nicely, as black can take on c3. And again, this is a very crazy line, but this is just how the theory goes. But again, if you remember these things, I think you should be doing quite well. Here we'll be taking with a pawn, queen takes on c3. You can just play bishop d2, queen takes on d4. And in this position, black has 4 pawns for the rook, but the situation still remains quite unclear. You can play bishop e3, and if white takes on d1, we take with the rook, and I feel like, if black takes on d1, we take with the rook. I feel like white is just much better here with the rook, because, yeah, the pawns are just way too slow, I think, at this point. And if queen c3 gets played instead, we can just go king f1, and after queen c4, queen e2, and we're ready to bring our knight into the game. Next with knight c7, I think white is doing quite well. And yeah, really the most precise move is to play queen e5 here as black, but I like rook c1 with the idea to bring the rook to c5, after rook d8, queen g4, hitting the g7 pawn, g6, can play queen f4, and I think it's fair to stop here already. It's move 22, and we have gone quite deep with the line, although this is a very forcing one, as I said, like the first 15 moves I think are quite forced. You can literally just blitz them out. But then, yeah, I think just remember this idea that queen h3 is really connected with that idea of going for bishop to b4 check, and then after c3, black has this trick with bishop takes on c3 and then queen takes that keeps him alive. And yeah, I think that's quite an easy way to memorize this line. But again, just practicing with a move trainer should do the job as well. So instead of queen h3, the other playable move that black has is queen h5. You can play knight b5, and in this position there are actually many alternatives. Like I've seen people playing a lot of moves here, and f6 is really the only good one. But for some reason, some players have tried c takes on d4, but white can just take on d4 with the knight, and after queen takes on d1, rook takes on d1, bishop b4 check. We can play c3, and after bishop a5, the easiest way to play is just take on c6, go knight d6, and after king f8, knight c4, and white is simply completely winning in this position, as black is losing material, because bishop b6 can be met with taking, and then rook d8, and you can see that this rook on h8 will be collected on the next move. So cd4, not really a great move, just take with the e knight. If black goes e5 here, this was also tried a few times in online chess, but you can just take on e5, and after knight takes, go knight c7, after king e7, just eliminate that e5 knight, and after queen takes, can take on a8, white is completely winning, being up a rook, and instead of this, king to d8 was actually played in an over-the-board game, but they can just take on c5 with check. After bishop d7, queen d2, we're preparing to castle long, and after queen d5, we can just castle, we're not afraid to play the endgame, and, you know, as after rook c8, we can just force it after knight c3. Black can trade, play a6, notice that bishop takes on c5, will allow rook takes on g7, so that's no good, and after a6, knight d6, black has to give up the bishop, but that is already really bad strategically, because after rook j, knight a4, the knight is infiltrating to b6, and yeah, black is just much worse, and white won a nice game in Dragun versus Balakrishnan in 2018. So with that being said, we can now just jump right into the best line, that is f6. And now the Fury goes knight c7, we take on 8. By the way, quick mention, d5 could also be an interesting alternative in this line if you really want to get creative, but I don't think it's really much better than knight a8. I mean, I don't think it's any better, but could make the game a little bit more trickier for black. But I thought I will keep it simple for this repertoire, and we're going to be sticking with knight takes on 8. And after cd4, here it's important, as I mentioned, do not take on d4. Just play queen to d3. The main thing, if you take on d4, as I explained a little bit earlier, you're allowing this trade and then e5, and black is simply equalizing. So after this, c takes on d4. We can play queen d3, and in this position, black has a choice. Bishop b4, for example, looks quite tempting, but it's actually quite a bad move after c3, because we can take with a pawn, hit the bishop, and mate rook d8, put queen c2, simply sidestepping the attack, and after bishop c5, can bring our knight with knight to c7, and yeah, white is just much better, and black doesn't really have that much compensation left. Instead of this bishop b4, black can also play g5. This is what the computer likes, but I think we can sacrifice the piece here with castles long, and after this, black can take on f4, but after knight takes on on d4, queen d5, knight c6, I feel like white should be better in this upcoming endgame. For example, if black also takes on c6 here, queen h3, it's just a very strong move to, just a very strong move for white, threatening queen h5 ideas, and black has to kind of avoid this. So that's why they take on d3, and after really important intermezzo with knight d8, black has to take it, otherwise we just collect the queen and be up way too much material. And after queen takes, rook takes, bishop g7, rook gd1, I feel like black could run into some issues with that bishop on c8. Although this endgame should be relatively balanced, I feel like still white should have a little bit the easier play. Although again, like this is really computerish play, and I don't believe so many people will actually find this defense for black. So instead of g5, knight b4 is another move that comes to mind for black, hitting the queen. But we can just go queen b3. It's important that in this position, queen c4 would not be great, as it allows queen c5. And yeah, this is really one of the key ideas why this line with queen h5 is much better than the other one with queen h4, because in this particular position, black is having this resource. So here queen b3 is better. Black can try queen d5. This is really the best try. But after taking a knight c7, again, the computer thinks that this is quite unclear, but I feel like it should be way easier to play this as white, as black having only 3 pawns for the rook. And yeah, I mean, there's just a very unclear position on the board, but I just feel like it's way easier to play with the rook. I mean, just imagine playing this position as black. You blundered 1 pawn, and then all of a sudden you can just resign. So yeah, I think this is already quite a good summary of this knight d5 line. As I said, it's like a very concrete one, but as long as you know the beginning of it, you go knight c3, go rook g1, go bishop f4, and then you know that knight b5 is going to come next. I think you're going to be doing very well in your games. Of course, if you do the extra study and you actually understand the upcoming middle games, that's going to be even better. Just as a starting point, try to remember it up till knight b5, and I feel like you should be doing fairly well. And with that being said, we can advance with some of the other variations, as for example, we will be quickly tackling this early queen b6 move, which is hitting the b2 pawn, but it's not really a problem for us, and we can just ignore it with castles. If black takes on d4, can take with a knight, and after knight takes, we're just gonna be really welcome to see the endgame with queen takes on d4. Again, after bishop takes, bishop b7, you can just play c4. Very nice move, gaining space, controlling the d5 square. Castles, we can play knight c3, and ideas continues something like rook d1, knight b5, and it's again like this bishop on c8 is really passive compared to this one on f3, so white just has a really nice advantage. If black takes on b2, if they go for this very risky move, you can just play knight b2 c3, and after queen a3, rook b1 is very strong, creating a threat of going knight to b5 on the next move, and then we can play even something like bishop f4, eyeing the c7 square. And if queen a5 gets played, we can just take on c5 now, as bishop takes on c5 fails to rook b5, and white just has very nice position here. And we can even play just knight b5 on the next move if black doesn't take. So this is very good for white. Bishop e7 can also be played, but this is a bit of an inferior move, as we can just go knight c3, and after cd4, knight d4, black can transpose to the line with 7, c takes on d4, and then knight takes d4, knight e5, followed by bishop e7 with queen e2. You will get what I mean when we get to that variation. But here the way to get some independent value would be to castle. But that would allow us to take on c5, and after queen a5 you have a very key move that you need to remember. This is knight c1. This is very clever because bishop takes on c5 will be met with knight to b3, winning material, and now white is just able to keep the extra pawn, as here after bishop d7, just play knight d3, and yeah, black goes bishop c6, just play queen f4, and white is up a clear pawn. So with that being said, we can now advance to the bishop e3, c takes on d4 lines, and now we're going to be taking with the knight, and black has again quite a few moves here. Really the most critical one is to play knight to e5, but there are also some other inferior lines that black can go for. Very honorable mention to knight takes on d4. This is really what I expect to be one of the most played moves that you will face, because this is so common in like lower rated games and people that don't really know that much theory against this particular one, because yeah, it's just trying to think, well, we can get rid of the queens and then we're not going to be mated, so with black it's a decent outcome. I mean, that's how some people think about the opening phase, but really the upcoming positions are very dangerous after bishop takes. And again, I've covered a few alternatives here to give you a better perspective of how to play this endgame. If black goes bishop to d6, we can play knight d2, and after e5, you can just play bishop c3 with knight c4 ideas in mind, and white is just much better. If black goes short castle, we can just hit the bishop with knight c4 after bishop c7 castle, and again, just a very unpleasant position for black. Have a lovely bishop on f3. Black is just having such a passive one on c8, and you can increase the pressure with bishop c5 next. So white is doing very well. By the way, funny way to end the game here. Rook d8, bishop e5. White is simply winning because the back ranker here, as something like this would just allow a checkmate on d8. So that has actually happened quite a lot in online games, so I wanted to show you this quick idea. Instead of bishop d6, black can also try knight d5, but here it's just best to go knight c3. We don't really need to take on d5 and go for the isolated pawn. We can just play knight c3. And after knight takes, bishop takes. I mean, just look at these bishops. It's just basically like slicing a pizza. If you see this, they're just all over the place, and it's really unpleasant for black to do any developing moves. As maybe f6 could be one of them to develop the dark squared bishop, but we can just castle, and after bishop e7, bishop a5 is actually incredibly precise with the idea to get this bishop to d6. And after something like this, rook e1, just a very nice move. And yeah, keep in mind that this one could be a threat now, and if black plays e5 himself, then we will play bishop d5 anyways, with a very nice position. Like if they go here, we can just break with f4. So this pawn is now in trouble. Instead of knight d5, bishop e7 is another way of playing, but here is just a very simple play for white. Castles and then go knight c3, meet rook d8 with rook d1, just defend d4 bishop, and after a6, just play a4, take space on the queen side, bishop b4, just go a5, and we have a very nice bind on the queen side. We can play like bishop b6 next or something like that, and if instead of this, black plays knight to d5, we can just trade a pair of knights, go for the IQP in this way, and yeah, as I said, we can just play g3, h4, and double up the rooks on the d file with long-term pressure against the d5 pawn. So, yeah, instead of taking on d4, again, I think already you got a pretty decent understanding of how to play sand games right now, and whenever you see something like this happening, you should be actually very happy, and you should be feeling quite comfortable with your endgame skills. So black can also try bishop d7, but it's again just a very easy way for white to get an advantage. After knight takes on c6, we can just trade twice, trade the queens, and king takes on d8 is forced because the rook has to cover the a7 pawn. Now we can play knight d2, and after knight d5, we can castle. We don't really mind black taking on e3. So we can activate our rook and then play knight b3, stopping ideas such as bishop c5, and if black goes bishop d6, just go h3, keep your pawn, and from now on we can continue with like rook d4, double up the rooks. The rook could potentially switch to a4 or to the king side. So white just has a very nice play. And yeah, that's literally all you need to know on bishop d7. Black could also try knight d5 in this position, but this allows simply taking on c6 and c4. And after knight takes on e3, you can just take on c6 intermezzo, and after bishop d7, just trade twice and take on e3 at the end. White is simply up a pawn. So again, knight d5, not really any good. And with that being said, we can move on to the more critical lines that are after black plays knight d5. This is really the main move, and if your opponent makes it here, I think he has some idea about this line. At least it's not the first time he has ever seen it. But still, we can just play knight c3, and theoretical debate continues, because now black has quite a variety of moves. I think we will start by showing what black should avoid, And for example, knight takes on f3 is a very common mistake that people do. And really, the way how this line works is that black usually waits for white to waste the tempo on queen e2, and then black takes on f3. So yeah, black will either win the tempo by playing a6 or bishop e7 usually, and then take. But a lot of people actually do not understand this detail, and they just take on f3 immediately, which is leading to very bad positions for black. After queen takes on f3, bishop b4 is just a very common way to lose here for black. I've had this in my games like a lot. I literally had this position so many times. Black takes on c3, you just go knight c6, and yeah, you're attacking the queen. If the queen moves away, you go rook d8, anyways, winning the queen. And bishop takes b2, we can simply take, because there is no check here, as the bishop protects that square. So black can just resign here. Instead of this, bishop e7 could be another move for black, but we're gonna be doing the same castle with ideas to go for a very unpleasant discovery. And after queen a5, for example, we can do the same trick. We can go knight c6, and if black takes, we can take with a queen, and now we're winning the rook. If instead of bishop e7, black plays a6, trying to control the b5 square, we can castle. Again, we have knight c6 ideas, so black has to sidestep, but now bishop f4 is very strong, and e5 not really working, because we can just take and play rook e1, and the queen is trapped. Not trapped, but pinned. I think it's a better way of putting it. And after bishop f4, black can still sidestep with queen b6, but now knight a4 is very strong, hitting the queen, and queen has to go away. But then the same nightmare with knight c6 happens. And if you take that knight, you're going to be getting mated in one. And if you take on c6, queen c6, and then we're going to be picking up the rook. Just a completely winning position for white. So, yeah, again, like, I really expect a lot of people to play this knight takes on f3 move against you, because, yeah, it's quite an important detail to throw in a6 or bishop e7 first. And the positions are kind of playable for black. But again, just so many people are not aware of this, and it's crazy to me. They can win so many free games like this. And instead of this, another questionable idea for black would be to play knight c4, hitting the b2 pawn and the e3 bishop. But here we can just play queen e2 with the idea that taking on b2, that would be a poison pawn. Because queen b5 happens, and then we pick up the knight. And if knight takes on e3, then we can just take with a queen. And after a6, white has a very nice lead in development. We can just castle, and then we're threatening to move the knight away. So queen has to sidestep, but now we can just play g4. And yeah, g5 is next. If knight moves away, knight e5 will be a huge threat, as this pawn is spinned. This is already a big initiative for white. So that is a very quick fix to knight c4. And instead of this, really, the main moves are a6. This is the most popular one. Bishop e7 is also quite an interesting line for black that I faced in my over-the-board game as well. And bishop b4 is actually a line that you need to be really aware of, because from my experience, I faced this quite often in online chess, and at first I try to play the same way as against the other lines, but this does not work. Like very often you just you're very used to play queen e2 and then castle long, but against bishop b4 there's no longer the case. And this is really where you have to use your brain and understand that there's something different, and you need to know the theory, obviously, because there's no way you can come up with this if you say this for the first time. So after bishop b4, it's really important to just play knight d to b5. And what you need to understand is that all the upcoming endgames after queen takes on d1, rook takes d1 are very pleasant for white. And for example, if black takes on f3, you can take with a pawn, and knight c7 is quite an unpleasant move to face already. And if black just goes for the normal move castle, you can go knight c7 after rook b8. We can take on a7. Looks like black's rook is trapped, but things are not that obvious here after bishop d7, because you can see that our knight on c7 is getting trapped. But here I find the easiest way to be just give back the exchange, go knight b5, and we're just up a pawn in this position. So I think we can stop here. And instead of this, king e7 is an interesting novelty given by the computer by black, for black, but you can go rook g1, and after bishop d7, have this important intermezzo with a3. After bishop takes, knight takes, rook g8, only move to defend the pawn. King throwing bishop c5, after king 8, I really like a4. And the idea is that we can meet any b6 move with bishop to d6, and we can also improve our position with moves such as king e2 and then rook d4, maybe even double up the rooks on the d file. With just easier play for white, because black is struggling to coordinate his rooks as the king is just sitting between him. So yeah, queen d1, again leading to quite pleasant positions. I think same thing can be said about bishop takes on c3, followed by queen takes on d1. Here it is actually a bit better to take with a bishop, and after knight c4 we can actually keep both our bishops with bishop to c1, and after bishop d7. I keep saying bishop way too many times, but we get bishop f3, attacking b7 pawn. After this, we can just trade, and if pawn takes, play b3, hitting the knight, and meet knight b6 with bishop a3, and then the king is kind of stuck in the center. And we also have quite a nice structural advantage, as the c6 and a7 pawns are quite weak. So instead of this, taking on f3, black could also castle in this position, but then we can just play bishop d2, bishop to e2 against knight c4 ideas. After queen c7, we can just play queen d4, if knight c6, queen h4, very nice move. You already know I'm a big fan of this queen h4 moves, if you've seen my Sicilian course. So queen h4 is very nice, and yeah, white just has a nice play here. You can continue with castle, and because of the bishop pair, white is doing very well. Instead of castles in this position, black could also take on f3, but after castle, sure, we can castle, and the problem for black is that it's really hard to develop this bishop without losing the b7 pawn. And after queen a5, we can play rook fd1, and after a6, h3 is a very nice move, and if rook d6, white had a really nice edge in the gameplay between Onishchuk against Mamadov in 2015. We can follow up with rook ad1 and then bishop b6 ideas. The enemy queen is really struggling to find a safe square. Plus, this bishop is really hard to develop. So, yeah, I think this is it about bishop takes on c3 line. And with that being said, we can move on to the more critical lines. And bishop d7 is quite an interesting choice for black here. But white has a very nice move, which is queen d4. This is connected with a very interesting novelty that I found. After knight takes on f3, pawn takes, bishop c3, knight c3, bishop c6. This was considered to be fine for black because, as you can see, the c6 pawn is under attack. I mean, the f3 pawn is under attack by the c6 bishop, and also black is threatening trade queens. But we have this super interesting idea of actually just giving it up with queen e5. And if black goes for bishop takes, we can play rook g1, and already g6 is losing on the spot after bishop d4. Because the knight is hanging, and the a8 rook will be taken if the knight moves, and black has to come up with this really precise queen b8 move in order to stay in the game. But still, after queen b5 check, knight e7, rook g3, hitting the bishop, bishop c6, we can play queen b4, and the enemy king is caught in the center. We can castle next with a very decent compensation for the sacrificed pawn. So again, I find these positions really fun to play as white, and yeah, we can move on to other lines. After knight d to b5, black would also play queen a5 in this position, but then I just like to castle. Keep in mind that queen takes on b5 is now a threat as the knight is pinned, so we're just going to be castling, and after castle short by black, we can go a3, hitting the bishop. Black has to take because bishop e7 runs into b4, and Black is just much worse now as queen d8 is forced and then the a7 pawn drops. So after a3, black needs to take on c3, but we can take with a knight, and after rook d8, just play queen e2, keep an eye on the f3 bishop, so we can recapture after knight takes. Even though if black tries to play bishop d7 here, sacrificing the pawn, I feel like white should be better in the upcoming endgame after rook takes on b2. Rook c1, defending the c2 pawn, and after rook c8, just play bishop d4. And white is up a pawn, although black does have some compensation. Although, you know, Kovalev managed to win in his game against the super promising youngster Dxe4 in a game played on Lichess in 2020. So yeah, that should be it about this queen a5 line. Just make sure to castle and then play a3. In this position, if black goes for castle, this is just a blunder, because we can take on d8, play knight c7, and after rook b8, bishop takes on e7, black is losing the exchange. And if knight f3 gets played, and then black tries knight d5, the easiest way to win is just play knight d5, to meet knight d5 with long castle. And then there's this problem with the pin, and white is just winning. So the last move that we will be covering against this bishop b4 line is knight takes on f3. Here we will be taking with a queen, and here black should castle, because a6 allows a very strong combo for white, which is rook d1, and after queen e7 we will have another strong intermezzo. We can play a3, and if black takes on b5, we can take on b4 and then castle, as short castle will be met with queen g3, and we are ready to play bishop d4 on the next move, putting a lot of pressure on the g7 square, and we will have all kinds of attacking ideas with knight e4, putting pressure on the enemy king side. So this is again very nice for white, and if black does go for short castle in this position, we can just go a3, hit the bishop. Black usually just takes on c3, after knight takes bishop d7. The pawn on b7 is not really that important, and we can just castle long, and after queen c7 can gain a tempo by attacking the queen, and after queen c6 I actually just like to keep the queens on here with queen to d3, and if rook d8 gets played, we can play bishop e5, and yeah, even though this position is still relatively close to equality, I feel like white should have an easier game with a much more active bishop compared to the enemy one. So with that being said, I think we can now wrap up this bishop b4 line. Again, just remember to play knight d to b5 against bishop d7. This queen d4 move is really the key move, and yeah, then the other end games are really promising. Queen d1, take with the rook, and black has problems with knight c7. And again, if they go for like taking, and then they take on f3, or actually if they take on d1, bishop d1, remember this nice idea that you can drop the bishop to c1, protect your b2 pawn, and then slowly we will push black's pieces back into his camp, and our bishop pair will put a lot of pressure in the long run. So instead of this bishop b4 move, one of the other main moves, as I said, is bishop to e7, waiting for us to play queen e2, and now black takes on f3. We take with a queen, and then black will castle short. Here we will be castling long, and now black has a choice between developing the queen to either c7 or to a5. If queen c7 here, I actually recommend we go for this novelty with h4, with the idea that bishop d7 will be met with g4, and after bishop c6 we can just take it, and if queen takes we can just take here twice and go for the endgame with rook to d4. And white has all kinds of rook c4, rook a4 ideas to rook left, and we're also defending our pawn in the same time. Black goes for something like knight d5, we can just trade and go rook a4 with pressure on the a7 pawn. So I think white should be a tiny bit better here. If after knight takes on c6, black takes with a b pawn, can go g5, attack the f6 knight. And after knight e5, just drop the bishop to d2. If rook b8, we're really safe after b3, and our king is just much safer here. We can play king b1 and then just continue our initiative on the king side with h5 and g6. So instead of queen c7, black mainly goes for queen a5. This is really the most popular move, and now white has this thematic idea of pushing the g4 pawn. And here, black has a choice between e5 or bishop b4 or bishop to d7. If e5, we're going to be playing knight b3, hitting the queen, really important move. And if bishop takes on g4, white is simply winning material after this really important queen takes on f6. Then we're going to be taking the enemy queen with a winning position. So black has to sidestep with queen b4, but now we can just go for the column h3, defending the g4 square. And after bishop d7, we're in time with g5, as bishop c6 can be met by queen f5. And after knight e8, we can just occupy the d5 square with knight to d5. Keep in mind that in this position, taking on h1 would have allowed taking on f6 with a winning position for white. So knight e8, knight e5 is very strong. And after bishop takes rook d5, we're going to be winning the e5 pawn with a much better position. And after g4, if black tries bishop b4, g5 is quite problematic to meet, as bishop takes on c3 runs into pawn takes on f6 with a much better position for white. And if knight d7 gets played, then knight b3 is very strong, hitting the queen. And after queen b3, another very important move, we have bishop f4, hitting black's queen. And after e5, have again another very concrete threat of going knight d5. And after queen c6, we can just finally retreat our bishop to d2. And we have a very well established knight on d5. That's securing a very nice edge for white. So last but not least, here after g4, black can try to sacrifice the b7 pawn by going bishop to d7. But then we can go g5, hitting the f6 knight. And after knight d5, have a very nice trick here. We can just play knight f5. Main point being that if pawn takes, we can take on d5 with a queen. This is actually very important. Just remember this idea, because we're forcing a winning endgame after knight takes. Bishop has to go away, but then the trick is we have knight e7. Again, only move bishop has to take, but then we take on d7, and white will win the b7 pawn, as black is unable to protect both pieces in the same time. So after knight f5, knight takes on c3 is a better defensive try. But then we can take on e7, and after king h8, rook d4 is actually the best move in this position. Bishop d2 is a very interesting alternative that was played by Onishchuk against Harik Adornavali, and I highly advise you to check out that game in the model game section, because I've covered it in great depth. But here, a little bit better is to try rook d4, and after rook e8, pawn takes on c3, rook e7, take on b7, queen c3, and after all this crazy complicated lines, we can just go queen b4. And yeah, if white goes queen a1 check, we can just play king d2 with a winning position, because we will be picking up the e7 rook. And if black goes for the endgame and plays bishop c6, we can play rook d1. And I feel like white still has a little bit of pressure because of the more active rooks. Although, yeah, black should have very fine drawing chances. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much enough about this bishop e7 line instead of the super theoretical a6 on move 9. And with that being said, we can really just dive into mainline theory of this line. After this a6 move gets played, we're gonna be playing queen e2, and here for black it's really important to take on f3. But there are also some other moves that have been tried here. For example, bishop b4 was played a couple of times, but this is actually really bad for black already, because we can castle. And after bishop takes on c3, this looks quite normal for black, but we can just throw in the intermezzo knight c6 with rook d8 on the next move, no matter what. And yeah, white is just winning the queen with a winning position. If black, for instance, tries after castle long to play queen e7, sidestepping the d file. We have this very strong bishop g5 move, and after knight takes, can take with a queen. And yeah, we're just having a very nice knight c6 idea to come that is giving us a winning position. So instead of bishop b4, bishop e7 was tried by Rapport and Martirosyan here, but white has a nice advantage after long castle, queen c7. Just go g4. If knight takes on f3, we can take with a queen, and after castles, g5, hitting the knight, knight e7. Just play king b1. We can continue with rook g1, knight e4, knight f6 ideas, with a big attack for white. The game could go knight b6, but then h4 is strong after knight c4. Just keep the bishop c1, making sure that the queen side is protected, and we can continue next with rook g1, and bring the knight to f6 with a very nice edge for white, even though the game ended in a draw in Belyakov against Martirosyan in Moscow 2018. So yeah, I think that's pretty much covering the alternatives that black has, and we can now check out the main line with knight takes on f3. Here's where most of the people are taking on f3 with a queen, but I actually found out that it's very interesting to deviate a little bit for the very well studied path and just take on f3 with a pawn. And this looks like a concession at first, but it's having some very interesting dynamical perspectives, as it's opening up the g file that we can potentially use to create an attack against the enemy king. And the game could continue in many different ways here. For example, black has a lot of moves at his disposal, but we will start by covering bishop to d7. Again, bishop b4 also moved, bishop e7, all kinds of moves that black has, but we will cover them shortly. Bishop d7, we're going to be castling along. After rook c8, king b1 is just a very nice move again to play. There's no need to be afraid of sacrifices like rook takes on c3 in this position, as after knight d5, you can just play bishop to d2, and yeah, black does not have full compensation for the exchange here. There's simply not enough pieces on the queen side. After king b1, black can also play bishop e7, but then rook g1 is strong, hitting the g7 pawn. And after g6, we can play knight b3, preparing to play the bishop to d4, just controlling this dangerous diagonal. After castle, bishop d4, queen c7. Bishop e5 is very strong, hitting the c7 queen. After queen c6, queen e3 is a very nice move. All kinds of ideas to bring the queen over the king side with queen h6, with a very nice initiative for white. So after king b1, really the main move that I think black has in this position is queen a5, where we can just attack it with knight b3. Now if black goes for this crazy queen lift to h5, we can just play rook g1 with the idea to go bishop d4 next, and again white has very nice play. We have all kinds of ideas to take on f6 and then play knight d5 because the enemy king is caught in the center. Instead of bishop d7, black can also try bishop b4, but we are in time with long castle, as bishop takes on c3 fails to work because of knight takes on e6, and yeah, if black takes on b2, we can just take, and the upcoming positions are just winning here for white. And if after long castle black plays queen e7, then actually knight b3 is a very strong move. Knight e4 was pretty unclear in the game Halderson against Garcian, because black can play e5. The position is not that clear at all. But I just like much better to play the move knight b3 here. And the main idea is that bishop takes on c3 actually runs into bishop c5. We're not gonna rush and capture on c3. Now even if black throws in this move and plays queen c7, we can play rook g1. Black is totally busted because the king is caught in the center, and we have all kinds of rook takes on g7 deadly threats. So white just wins here if black takes on c3. So castles needs to be played, but after rook g1, this is the typical move. This is really why we took on f3 with the pawn, because we have this nice kind of attack on the g file. So rook d8, bishop d4, trying to play queen e5 next, with just a very nice initiative on the king side. So white is just much better. After g takes on f3, black could also just play this sort of developing move, bishop to e7, but then we can castle, threatening knight c6 or knight takes on e6. So black has to sidestep with queen c7. So we can play rook g1, hitting the g7 pawn. If black just plays g6, we can sort of always throw in this bishop h6 move, and the king is caught in the center. It's really unpleasant to play for black. And if black goes for short castle, then we can just go bishop h6, and yeah, black just has to give up the exchange in this position by playing g6. And we can just take with a better position. It doesn't look so simple to make progress here, but the idea is to just push h4, h5, and weaken black on the king side. Instead of this here, black could also try e5. Keep in mind that this move was never really tried, and it is something that I found out by analyzing with a very strong engines. So this was never really played in practice, but it's leading to some interesting lines here against e5. It's very nice to just play bishop f4, and we're temporarily sacrificing the knight, but white is getting interesting play after bishop takes. Queen has to move away. Now we regain the piece with bishop takes on f6. Black has bishop e6. Can just keep the bishop with bishop e5. And after a long castle, we can castle short. Black plays bishop d6, rook fd1, bishop takes, queen takes, with a pretty unclear position for both sides. And what I really wanted to mention is that if black takes on b2 here, that will open up the b file for our rook and potentially create an attack against the enemy king. And if black does not, white is up a pawn. But anyways, the position still remains very unclear. But I'm quite skeptical about the fact that people would really play e5 against you, as this was never really played, and it's not the most logical move in the position. And what I think could potentially be what you will really face more often here is the move knight d5, and I've prepared a very nice idea here where you can just take on d5 and then go for long castle, which looks like it's blundering the a2 pawn, but we actually have a very deep idea. We will be playing knight b3, and then recovering the a1 square, and then the queen is sort of out of the game here on a2. And the game could go bishop e7, but then we play rook g1, and if g6 happens, then bishop d4. Again, the position is just very difficult for black, and if short castle gets played, you can go h4. Very nice move, and just play bishop e5 next, with super nice initiative on the king side, while this queen is actually not doing that much on a2. So queen takes on a2 would be very dangerous for black, and instead of that, bishop e7 would be safer. But we can just still ignore the a2 pawn and play rook g1, hitting the g7 pawn. Black plays bishop f6, defending it. But now knight b3 is nice, hitting the queen. And after queen to e5, we're just going to be dealing with this threat of queen takes on b2 by playing c3. And we have one game from this position that went queen b5, and we can just take on b5, and after pawn takes on b5, a3 was played in the Gordievsky game, but I think even better would be to start with knight c5 immediately. And we're having all kinds of knight e4 ideas on the next move with knight d6, knight takes on b5 potentially. And I feel like white has just a very nice pressure in this position, even though a3 was also a playable move, and white eventually won in that game. But I feel like knight c5 is stronger with a nice edge for white. And if black after c3 goes for the novelty with a short castle, I like knight c5, and after b5 can attack the queen with f4. If the queen moves away, then queen f3. It's very strong, hitting the rook. If the rook moves to b8, then I like knight e4, bishop b7, can take on f6 and play queen g3. And I think white has very nice attacking prospects with bishop to d4 on the next move, with pressure on the g7 square. So I think that's pretty much it about this chapter, where we cover d takes on e4, and then pretty much everything that black has after bishop f3. As I said, c5 is really the main line, and I expect really a lot of people to go for knight c6, bishop e3, and as I said, just gonna be quickly summing things up here. Black has all this kind of alternatives, e5, that is leading to that famous endgame that I've covered, the queen d1, king takes. You have to really understand how to play these positions in order to be good at this bishop d3 line. Plus, black can also go for this concrete lines of going for knight d5 and grabbing that pawn. As long as you remember to go knight b5, play for the fork, I think again you should be good to go. And yeah, instead of that, most typically black takes on d4, and the lower rated players are taking on d4 twice, allowing very nice endgames for white. And the more experienced ones will play knight e5 in this position. But I still feel like after knight c3, just so many people are taking on f3 immediately, which is a very big mistake that I think you can just abuse and win a lot of games against. And if black goes for the tricky bishop b4, remember to go knight b5 and do not allow black to double your pawns on c3. And in the other lines, if bishop on e7 or a6 gets played, just go queen e2 with the idea to castle long. Remember that against the main line with a6, queen e2, we have this very fresh idea of taking on f3 with the g-pawn, preparing to castle long, and then we're getting all these crazy ideas of knight e6. As for example, again, like I've trapped so many people with this line after bishop b4, bishop c3, knight takes on c6, simply completely winning. And yeah, I think that should be pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and you learned a thing or two from it. And I hope to see you in the upcoming chapters. So thanks for watching, and take care.